bit more about Lapulan. I'm still Tatjana Damjanovic. I'm not giving the recent past. But I'm here not to talk about the theory-based evaluations, but to talk about a different project. So, as part of the 3 wellbeing interventions, we also commissioned a project evaluating wellbeing interventions using quasi-experimental designs. But that project just isn't quite finished. We're still in the analysis phase. What we have here is a panel of students that were involved in the project, and they're going to talk about their experiences. So I've got Emma, Kristenn, Jodie, and Ruichen who will introduce themselves in a moment, and we'll be talking about student engagement in evaluations. Thank you guys for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi, my name is Ruichen, and I was involved in the TV project as a student advisor when I was from undergraduate degree at the University of Exeter. And now I'm still a student, so I'm doing my master's at the moment, and I'm still very much interested in the field of mental health. So, yeah, it's great to be able to get involved.
My name's Jodie. At the time of doing this research, I was a master's student at the University of Sheffield, and I've also worked as a student advisor with a focus on disseminating some of these insights to our population.
Hi, I'm Kristenn. I'm a second year PhD student at the University of Sheffield, and I do research around longitudinal mental health and counselling outcomes.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Broglia. I'm a researcher and lecturer from the School of Psychology at the University of Sheffield. In this capacity, I worked with Ipsos, who's our independent evaluation team. My role was to lead our student involvement, so I've facilitated opportunities for students to engage with different levels of the evaluation.
Thank you so much. And we're going to start a little bit with you, Emma, if you're going to tell us a little bit about your work in this project.
Sure, absolutely. So it's probably a little bit strange talking about a project that you haven't heard of yet. We won't be going into too much detail about the actual evaluation, more so our approach to student involvement. So for us, it was really important to have opportunities for students to engage with work at various different levels. And although the institution running the interventions all did brilliant work to embed student voice, for us as the independent evaluators, we wanted to make sure that students were still involved in the interpretation of those findings. So today there's been lots of talk around language use, actually communication, and for us we just really wanted to make sure that we weren't making any assumptions. We were analysing the data, so a combination of sort of hardcore quantitative data that the universities were collecting routinely, but also focus groups and interviews with members of staff and students involved in those interventions. So Ipsos and I really wanted to make sure that we had a student advisor panel. So we had more students than were able to attend today. We made sure that we had student advisors who were sort of ambassadors or representatives from each of the higher education providers that we worked with. We left it up to the universities to recruit student advisors, so the decision was up to them as to whether they wanted student advisors who were aware of the interventions or whether they had more independent student advisors that were sort of not involved. And then Sheffield, we were only there as an evaluator, so we didn't run any of these interventions. So our student involvement at Sheffield was more from an independent point of view.
Thank you so much. And maybe we could hear about your involvement more from your perspective.
Yeah, so I, at the time when I was recruited, I was still a student at the University of Exeter, and I was mainly involved in the interpretation and analysis of the findings from the 3 wellbeing interventions, one of which was conducted at the University of Exeter. So I was able to bring in my just own lived experience as a student at the time, but also my understanding of how people are likely to respond to these wellbeing interventions, just from my knowledge of how students, for example, prioritize the different tasks that they have in the student life, but also how the characteristics of these interventions might be interpreted by students who, of which we're trying to support. So I was involved in reading a lot of qualitative data that was collected, and also just discussing a lot with Emma as well about what this really means when it comes to not only the effectiveness but also the impact of these interventions when they are being trialed in the actual university setting.
So me and Kristen took over from there. We kind of read the opinions and the insights from our fellow student advisors. We discussed it between ourselves, our opinions. Obviously, we had no direct contact with any of the interventions, so it was just kind of what we thought as like external students. And then we used that to create a podcast to kind of bring more students into the conversation. So it's going from students out to more students, just to get everyone talking about wellbeing and what we can do about it.
Yeah, exactly what Jodie said, essentially. But also making sure that we bring in our own lived experience and saying, oh, actually, if we attended these workshops, or what would we think of these interventions? And we were quite critical in those podcasts. So when it does come out, I hope you do give it a listen. It's very accessible, so share it with your students as well.
Yeah. Because we had ones that we liked personally and didn't like. We didn't always agree on what ones we didn't like. They all had their uses, just with different student groups. So it's quite interesting to see how different students will respond to different interventions and kind of start thinking about why, not in like a super formal capacity, but just in our lived experiences.
And also to add though, obviously I came from a student's perspective, but because I also worked sort of as a staff, as a managerial to student advisors, there was a bit of like the pastoral mentor bit, where I was like, oh, I would see this kind of in this perspective for staff. So there's a lot to there. Lots to listen to those podcasts that you can reflect on, the pros and cons and everything. And I think that's the whole thing with every approach you take. There will always be a pros and cons. And I think what we agreed on towards the end of the podcast was all three of them, and maybe this should all use in tangent. So yeah.
Yeah, it must have been really valuable to have that critical eye on different aspects of it. So there's so many ways of involving students in wellbeing and evaluations. What do you think worked or didn't work in the way you were involved?
So I'll just speak on behalf of my experience when I was involved as a student who had just finished my undergraduate degree. I would say first, I was very glad that I was financially compensated because it was a contracted role. So I was very lucky in that I was able to get my time compensated directly. In a lot of the other student co-creation involvement work I've participated in, there are also other ways of providing like incentives or like thank you students for that time, because I think usually it takes quite a lot of mental effort to like actually reflect on student experiences for university students who have very busy lives at university. And so that was very useful. And I think that in itself also allowed me to feel like my opinions and voices were valued. And I imagine that would be similar for a lot of students, and especially the students who are underrepresented in higher education. And also, I think one of the facilitators was how flexible it was. So the majority of our work was done online, which meant that there was that accommodations for students in various institutions to all contribute to this work. And also it was conducted mainly during the summer holiday period. So that was also really helpful to just allow us to still get involved without having to consider like other logistic barriers. And I think it was just a very valuable experience because I felt that we were really listened to, in the project, and our feedback were really valued and brought on to the full analysis. So I would say these are the really helpful points that I would highlight.
I agree. I feel like the research team did want to hear our opinions. We were given a structure. So we based some of our podcast work off the University Mental Health Charter and mapping the interventions and the insights onto the charter. So there was like the traditional research structure and it was adding to the field. But we also just talked about our own personal experiences at university. And both of those things were equally valid. And that was very nice, and I thought that was useful.
I agree with everything they said, but something personally, I did feel a bit of pressure because I was like, oh, I wanted to be a bit more voices out there. It's not just mine. Especially when I was doing my neurodiverse opinion, I felt like it's obviously my personal opinion, but I hope other people can relate to it as well. So there was a side pressure there. So get more students involved, please.
Pressure for you to kind of carry that. Yeah, so I wonder if Emma, you had any reflections on that?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of things that have been said, particularly with what Kristenn just said around that pressure. I think for me, something that I didn't anticipate was the pressure put on students, like being ambassadors, representing whatever it is we wanted them to represent. So I think one thing I struggled with was making sure that you're trying to create a space that sort of feels like there's no power balance or like there's no right or wrong answers, and particularly because so many of you have lots of different roles. So you were students, but a lot of you were working part-time, or a lot of you were thinking about your next thing. And so I think, yeah, for me, it was a real challenge, particularly working in that online space. Usually this is the sort of thing that I prefer to do in person, but we lived all over the country. And actually at one point we were in different time zones because there were holidays and people were in different countries. So I think that was a real challenge having to do it online, but it did sort of make it a little bit more accessible as well.
Pros and cons to every kind of way of working. And we're talking a lot about student wellbeing today, and I was just wondering what your perspectives are on where we should be going next in terms of research, but also in terms of, what you should be doing in practice in universities.
I think there's a lot of work being done right now, but being on the end as a researcher, we're putting the information out there, but also as a student, I do feel like it really needs to be appreciated that as students, we're getting something through our email every day, hence why we will be ignoring your emails. I'm notorious for deleting emails that have no real impact on my PhD. So it's about finding that balance of all those well-being interventions are great, but it's about it being too much, really, and that there also needs to be a university-wide approach, because you've got the consulate service, you've got the university, you've got the department, you've got this and that, and they're all doing something great, but they all need to communicate, and I think communication is one of the skills that everyone needs to have, and especially within the well-being setting as well. I was going to say something else, and I forgot. But I could talk.
We can come back to you. Yeah.
It's come up a lot today, the idea of engagement, student attendance. It's come up 50 times. And I think as a student, obviously you want to be engaged, but particularly in my experience as a first generation student, is you're at uni to learn well-being. It does take a backseat. There is still a culture of I should be busy with friends, I should be busy with work, I should be busy with academic work, and a certain level of not feeling great can become very normalized very quickly. And so I think any research or outreach efforts to get students to recognize, or they do recognize that their well-being might not be brilliant sometimes, but it's hard to find the motivation to change it. It just feels like, oh, well, that's an accepted part of university. And start that conversation that it's okay if you're not feeling brilliantly, but there are things that can change it.
Yeah, I think just adding on to the really good points, there were two things that I was hoping to mention. So first, I think there's a lot of practical burdens that the students are facing, which could be helped by wellbeing interventions, but also could also use other sources of support, such as the cost of living crisis. So I was just thinking when I first started at looking at those wellbeing interventions for evaluation. Let's say if there was a student who's struggling with paying off their rent, it's unlikely they're going to be seeking out like an initial CBT consultation. That's quite an extreme example. I was just hoping to use it to illustrate how there are loads of underlying issues that are perhaps preventing students from being engaged and also from help seeking. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that I think like there's a lot of structures in universities providing support. There's a lot of existing structures like student representatives and the student union offer a lot of support, and there are sometimes teams dedicated to providing wellbeing support and accommodations, which hopefully can all be utilized to perhaps as foundations for further wellbeing support, and perhaps they could be embedded into training or maybe more coaching for student mentors who are already on the peer support roles, which I feel like could be a more efficient way of getting more students to be engaged, because a lot of them would have already known about those structures.
I remembered my point. One thing I feel like is important to note is maybe students might not know what the distinction is between well-being and mental health. And they might think well-being or mental health, no, I'm not doing that bad. And especially people from different cultures, international students, mental health and well-being is not talked about often. So it's not something that they'd readily come towards and like participate in, which is why I really like to talk before the break about making it an accessible environment, because I feel if you have communication around, oh, there's this well-being event or I don't know, something like that, it's a bit scary to get that email as an international student. I think that what was my experience when I first came into the country. It's like, well-being, mental health, and I'm like, oh, that's not for me. I'm not doing that bad. I was not that I was doing bad, but I was in a new country. It was quite overwhelming. So it's about how you communicate that and maybe implement at the very start of the university the distinction between what well-being and mental health is, and well-being is a sort of everyday thing, and you can seek support for well-being or like put things in place for them, but also defining their own well-being. That's a part of it.
Yeah, I also think to make it clear, if the university is willing to support for more than just academic matters, like make that clear to students, because if a student's dealing with a personal problem, they might not realise the university is willing to help them through that. They might just think, I'm here to learn. If it's not to do with my grades, the university doesn't care, which I'm sure is very much not the case. But for new students especially, it's sometimes hard to realise that.
Thank you so much. We are going to open up the floor to the audience if you have any questions. There is one question. If you could just wait for the mics.
That was a brilliant session. Thank you. When's the podcast about?
So all of our student-led outputs will come out when the report comes out. So as well as a couple of podcast episodes, we have a couple of blogs after Ruichen Yin. There's also the zine said by one of our other students, Glenn, which also Kristenn and Jodie took part in. So we have about 6 student-led outputs that will come out with the report. So whenever the report comes out.
Okay. Well, let's talk about I think this is a really important moment that everyone in the room has right now. My takeout from today is there's a lot of great people trying to do great things. And I think we had the right idea, but we had the wrong intervention. I think hearing you talk, what comes to me is personalization of intervention. We've got to be thinking this way. That's how we see it in the rest of the consumer world. Personalized intervention coaching is the ultimate of that, because you asked the person what they did. You did a very teasing thing earlier on. You said there were some interventions that we liked and others that we didn't like. Could you give me and the audience a couple that you liked to maybe steer us away from the ones we didn't?
I'll go through this because it touches upon your point. But there was an intervention that was personalizable, which is why I personally liked it a lot as a neurodivergent person, because I am my own expert. And in that, it was the workshop or the toolkit. You went there, you learned a set of skills, and you're able to build yourself a support work path for something that targets your own needs. And I think that's something anyone and everyone can really utilize. But also there might be students out there that are not as self-aware as that of their needs, but there are other interventions out there that can help them with that.
Now, did that get through your email filter? Did it come to you in a different way?
Did it get through your email filter?
So it's based on those 3 wellbeing interventions that we read on and that group was part of, not from my university.
Yeah, we didn't have any direct experience with the interventions. My favourite was another one, which was more about one-to-one human conversation, and that's why I liked it. I'm not going to give too much away.
So I've just got a quick follow-up. I think, first of all, I think it's really important to distinguish between the potential power of digital technology to give the signals through analytics, but its weakness in terms of interventions, particularly email, which I didn't think your generation used email anymore anyway, so I could, that was. Whereas the interventions you're talking about are all human interventions. Architects, all of you mentioned the different scales that those human interventions can happen. There was the central building, there was the faculty, there was the department. I wonder if you had any thoughts about how those different scales of human intervention perhaps could be better coordinated or into a whole, or maybe they already were.
It's a good question.
Well, I did touch upon how there are already several teams that had support student wellbeing from different parts. Like, for example, the one that was evaluated at Exeter was called Pastoral Mentor, which sort of sat more in the academic faculty, but also it aims to act as a bridge between like personal tutor and the academic faculty and the wellbeing service at the university. So I remember in our evaluation we were talking about how it would be really useful to establish a lot of communication between personal tutors and pastoral mentors, which I would say applies to other teams as well. So, for example, for the student representatives, which I believe exist at a lot of student unions, there could be more communication between perhaps the academic faculty, which they're supposed to be already linked to because they usually gather feedback from students and then they have meetings with academic staff to discuss, from my experience, mainly issues around education. But I feel like if that's something that's possible to be discussed within certain universities, perhaps lobbying could also be a topic that's brought up. It obviously depends on the capacity and how each student union and student representatives at each institution works. But I would say just more communications about what they are doing and how they're supporting students can be translated across different teams, and whether there are resources that could be used by the different teams. So, for example, the example that I usually use is at Exeter, there is a resident live team that's dedicated to supporting wellbeing for students, mostly first-year students living in university accommodations. And when I was also on another panel to co-design some mental health literacy course, I used the idea that perhaps this could be embedded into training for the student mentors from that team when they go out and proactively talk to students. And perhaps that could be something, perhaps they could be a way of disseminating the information about these support that's available at the university, which they might not know because first year and the transition period is quite overwhelming. But maybe this could act as a channel of communication and just another method of getting that information out to students. So, well, I say more communication between different teams is definitely easier said than done, but I would say just recognizing how there are, as you said, like many great people do great things, and seeing how maybe they could collaborate and work together might be one way forward.
Thank you. I think we had a question up here, or down here. Sorry.
Hiya. So it's kind of elements have been mentioned already. One of the questions that comes up a lot with my colleagues and I, kind of variables including the amount of bureaucracy students are subjected to, and the what of relationships again. Is a student starts at university and they're given 6 different contacts for 6 different services, all via email. And often if the first interaction they have is a really positive one, that person then becomes the go-to person. And so there's constant debate around if that's so intuitive to have a kind of a named trusted contact. What are we doing about the fact that we're then giving students all of these email addresses, all these contacts for different services for who they have to tell their stories to? It comes up a lot in kind of conversation. I wondered if that kind of dilemma came up a lot in your research.
I think it did. Yeah, in one of the interventions we were talking about, in which it was a one-on-one trusted contact, we did bring up the fact of what if a student didn't get on with their trusted contact, or if they just didn't click, and that could then leave the student unfairly isolated compared to their peers. But to come up to university, especially in the transition period, which I think they've alluded to a couple of times today, is usually you're going from like relatively small school, small community to this big, wide open space full of people, full of bureaucracy. And so sometimes having a recognizable face or a recognizable name, email signature, whatever it is, can just make you feel a bit more like a person and less like a number. But then it does bring up risks of if you don't have that and then everyone else around you does. So it is a complicated thing that students experience as well. I don't know enough about the bureaucracy to know any solutions to it.
I was just going to add something really quick on that from a perspective as a tutor. So what comes up a lot in the research and wider research is that having that key relationship is really important. However, what I'm now learning is that if you're then identified in the academic department as somebody who's friendly to go to, you then see more and more students. So, I mean, I love it, don't get me wrong, but at the minute, I'm a personal tutor for about a quarter of our master's cohort, a quarter of our undergrad cohort, PhD, Deacon, Sign, MSc. I can't remember all of the names and faces of all of those people. So I also think that it's about supporting staff and maybe their soft skills or training or support, not only for staff, but also managing the expectations of students, because I feel terrible if I see a student and I feel like I don't know them good enough level yet, because I might have seen 20 students that day. So I just wanted to ask the flip side of it.
Absolutely. Here we have time for one more question. Quick question.
I just wanted to touch on something that Jodie said and Kristenn said. Jodie, you said you're a first generation university student, and obviously Kristenn said about cultural differences and understandings of things. We're talking a lot about the support that's coming from the university. Obviously it takes a village, right? You've been thrown to university, expected to be grown-ups straight away. And I'm just wondering, a triangulation between those with care and responsibility for those students, or what awareness they have of what the university is putting in place. Because if you have a student that doesn't say anything to anybody the entire semester, has a rank, and then is talking to somebody that's never experienced university, doesn't really know what is a way to signpost them to something, they have that information, so that would be useful, like, helpful them. I don't know if that's something that the university does, it's something about triangulation with any information for those at home to support somebody studying. Because we've got students that are all online university students, and so we're very aware that the families take a massive toll on what they're doing with their studies. So we're always trying to make sure that we're including them. We're just wondering if that was something that you have considered. It wasn't anything I experienced as such when I came to university. I mean, obviously the transition period is difficult for any students. I do think the university, I mean, it depends on the university. My experience with Sheffield is they had quite a good scheme of kind of like recognising backgrounds and like extra steps that I've taken. But it's very overall experience. We have no idea what to expect. I think it's going to be like the films. It's not. But it just depends on the uni and what they have in place for students coming in. And the transition period can be very difficult for all students.
Oh, I think what helped me with having peers going through the same thing and being very open and honest about what they're dealing with and their difficulties, because that made me feel like, oh, they're having difficulties as well. I'm not the only one struggling. And that just, for me at least, instantly takes the anxiety away and makes me feel like I'm more closer. And I think, kind of speaking a little of Sheffield here, what they felt to do, which is when I started my PhD, is that I wasn't that sense of fear. Like, I didn't know who my goal was, apart from one person when sort of before I started PhD. I think there really needs to be a closer sense of community and cohort when people start, because the support you can get from people going through the same thing you're going through, even if they don't have the same cultural background or views or whatever, is so much more than what staff can offer you and what we support can offer you. Because it's just knowing that you're not struggling alone. It's the best thing out there.
And thank you for giving us that like undergrad, postgrad difference specifically. Well, thank you so much all for joining me today. And I hope you'll join me in thanking our wonderful panel for arranging.